I graduated high school, my dad was hanging commercial siding called ACM, aluminum composite material, on buildings. And he offered me to go from Michigan to New York, an 8-hour drive, for a job for 3 weeks. And I went. And it was just my dad, me, and a random coworker. A random guy who was my dad's age. So we get out there, we do that job, and then maybe we do another, and all of a sudden these are big on the road jobs, so I was getting decent paychecks for me being 18, living at home. And so all of a sudden I had money like I'd never had before. Like I'd always depended on my parents or minimum wage, so suddenly I'm making like $20 an hour on the road pay. So this was like unimaginable money. All of a sudden I had like an Xbox and a PlayStation, and I was like, should I get the Nintendo? And probably should have been saving it. But I was always on the road with older people. They were always in their 50s and me being 18. So I'd hear about all my buddies and everyone back home having a good time, partying. They're just reaching college age. Half everyone went to college. The other half is just partying in a field somewhere. And so I felt like I was trapped in New York with a bunch of 50-year-old men, and everyone was back home having all this fun. And it began to grow this like desperate, like I wasn't around people I felt like I could really talk to in a way that was just me and them. I don't know, on the same level of like me being 18 to another 18-year-old. Instead it was just, I don't know, adults, I guess. So anyway, I started to get desperate and I started to feel trapped. And so one day I went and I bought a laptop, and I was like, I have a plan. I need to get out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a novel. I don't read novels. I mean, I have, but I'm not like a big novel reader. But I am going to write a novel so it pays my bills, pays enough so that I cannot have to keep going and being trapped in New York while my friends all move on without me and we slowly drift apart, which we were. So I start working on this novel, and I think for 3 years I just wrote just this random, never read anything, just pecking away at this laptop I bought. And eventually I came out with this big jumbled mess that I spent like another year editing. And I think it was 4 years total before I went to this self-publishing, I called the novel Apocalypse Theory. And I went to this self-publishing, just looked up online, this self-publishing agency, and it was more or less of a scam thing. Like, pay us $1,000 and we'll publish your works. And so, but I went through that, and they did everything, and this big jumbled mess was out. And so then I was like, okay. And I think it was around that time that I left the New York jobs. My little brother had joined us and his buddies, and I was just tired of it. We were 5 years into doing it, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I want to be home. I want to be with my friends and all that. So I went and got a job at General Motors as a temp for a huge pay cut. And that was when a plane flew over. So, I then wanted to work on my second novel. I wanted to start, that one was finished, so I was going to work on the next one, and I needed an idea. And I looked at what was popular at the time, and at that time I had read Twilight, and I thought at the time, it was a good book to read. I ate the whole book up, and it seemed like a lot of people were reading this, and I think that was when The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was out. I was reading that, so all of a sudden I was a reading machine, I guess, during this time. But I decided to write Sapiens, and I based this novel, I literally went into Twilight and tried to dissect it to the best of my novel of what makes this such an addicting read for so many people. And I went chapter by chapter, and I tried to recreate Twilight with different characters, different fantasy aspects, but main character goes into a new town, they meet the mysterious other character, they have a conversation on chapter 3, and it goes like this, like conversation for conversation. This book was the same. I was like, Bella and Edward have a conversation on page 3 of chapter 2, and they're arguing about this, but it starts off friendly and it devolves. So I tried to just to see and find out, and it was this big experiment of what makes Twilight tick. And so I wrote this whole book that was Twilight. And by then I found out that Amazon had KDP publishing, and so the Kindle was new. It was blowing up. Everyone was like, this new technology, the Kindle. And I went, and you can just basically upload a Word document to Kindle and just your own picture that's the size of a book cover, and then boom, that's all you needed, and it could be on Kindle. And so that's what I did with Sapiens. And I think I formatted it. They had a print-on-demand book thing that was invented then. So they did book on demand. And so I published that. And the new popularity with the Kindle was cool. Sapiens actually started to get some people reading it, and a fair amount. And that was awesome. And I think I wrote a short story, maybe Murder Man at this time. It all blends together a little bit now, but these were all around that time. So I wrote a short story, uploaded that one too. And then I decided I wanted control of Apocalypse Theory. So I went back to that publisher, and I told them I didn't, I wanted out, and they wanted me, I can't remember. Anyways, I got out of it. And then I took Apocalypse Theory, and I went through and I re-edited the whole thing one more time with all the stuff I had learned. I did a full edit, renamed it The Sword and the Staff, and then went through my process of uploading it through Kindle. So now I had it on Kindle, but I didn't bother making it a paperback. I just did the Kindle version. So that way now it was in my control, and I had all my novels on Kindle up to that point. And I don't think it sold very much. Not like Sapiens. So then I got the idea that I was really into zombies, and I wanted to write for me. So I wrote Hurricane Dan, which is basically, I had decided that no one was telling good beginning to end zombie stories. They were always rushing. A zombie apocalypse would start, and then it would be oh, the Earth's in shambles, post-apocalyptic wasteland, here we are. And the story just goes from there, and it's almost like the zombie outbreak is just an introduction. And I really wanted to encapsulate that. Like, no, like day one, it's kind of weird what's going on. This guy's freaking out over there. Day two, hey, I think we have a problem here. Day three, everyone's starting to panic. Day four, it's like military lockdown, but it's still people, you can still go shop and stuff. But day five, it's like the military's losing. I just really wanted to encapsulate that like slow breakdown. And it was before The Walking Dead, like within 6 months of the first episode of The Walking Dead. And I think zombie fever was really tapping into the nation, I guess, because that's probably why I wrote it. Everyone wanted zombie stuff, and I wanted zombie stuff, so that's what I made. And I also played this video game called StarCraft, and there was this is a fun Easter egg. So StarCraft had where you can make your own games, and someone made a game inside of StarCraft called Raccoon City that was a zombie game that was based off of the movie Resident Evil Raccoon City, or Resident Evil 2, that second Resident Evil movie, and that was based off of a game. So this was a book based off of a game, inside of a game, based off of a movie, based off of a game. And I really wanted to encapsulate like that gaming experience. I thought it was an awesome little mini game, this thing that was made. And so I tried to kind of simulate how the zombie breakdown goes in that game, which is, I don't know, random. So that one comes out, and that book is just going nuts. To this day, this book was, I mean, for me, because it was that zombie fever, I think. I tapped into all the people that wanted what I wanted when I wrote it. And it was to the point where this book that was selling for 99 cents or $2.99, I can't remember now, it's probably $2.99, it was making $300 a week for 3 weeks in a row. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, this is the moment. I could do this for a living. Like, this is real money. This is pay your bills. This is it. This is what I've been fighting for and writing for all these years. We're over half a decade in, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was like, I gotta start the next one. So then I started on Takedown, which I was like sitting there. By then, that was the point. I went back to doing siding. I left GM because I didn't make any money, and I was doing siding. And the siding was home, local. So the 2008 economy crash made us have to go on the road. Now the economy was improving, and so actually now we weren't in Manhattan, we weren't in New York, we were actually like 10 miles from here down the road, the next town over, which was just incredible to me that I could do that job and still be home. And so we're doing that, and I remember just working, and I wanted to write a novel about wrestling. I wrestled in high school, and I just really didn't think there was very many good wrestling books or novels or movies or anything. And so I wanted to just get in there and make this book that could draw people to wrestling and like it and kind of see it in the way that I saw it growing up as wrestling my whole life. But I didn't know what a story was. And I was like, how can I make this wrestling story? And then one day, The Freshman by the Verve Pipe came on. And that's all about how they're a freshman in high school, and this guy kind of messes with his girlfriend, just being stupid kids, and the girl kills herself. At least that's what I get out of the song. And now he's older, he's like a senior, and he has to look back and reflect that he made someone kill themselves, and all this psychological damage and everything it's done to him, and he has to cope. And then I have him use wrestling as a means to deal with that cope and that stress. And then it kind of like devolves and comes out that maybe she didn't kill herself, like maybe there was some foul play and it's a cover-up, and it just kind of goes into that mystery aspect. And so I wrote this thing and I put it out on Kindle, and it didn't perform. I think Kindle was starting to get a little bit older, and by then the $300 a week had gone from like $300 to like $350 to back to $300. The next month was like $200, and it was $150 after that. Now it's down to like, I was making, like, we're still within 90 days of releasing Dead by Dawn, and it's down to making like $50 or less a month. So all of a sudden that initial rush and excitement had passed. And so now I was looking, and I finished Takedown. I went to the library and I wrote this thing after I had that Verve Pipe moment of just clarity of what this book was going to be. And I went to the library, and I think it was the last $300 week, and I just sat there, and for 8-hour days I sat there and I typed and I wrote this whole book. I did it within 90 days. I wrote all of Takedown, and then by that time Dead by Dawn had stopped selling. It was down to like less than 50. And here comes another plane. Anyway, so I released Takedown, and it doesn't do very good at all. Like, it, compared to coming off of Dead by Dawn, it's still getting outsold by Dead by Dawn. That's later. It's getting outsold by Hurricane Dan. And it never passes Hurricane Dan. And it comes out, gets a few sales, and then just kind of fades. Until I got an offer. I get a random message on, I don't know, Instagram or Twitter or something. And it's a lady, and she's asking if I can send copies of Takedown to all these Florida schools for Florida teens read as an indie. And so I'm pretty excited, so I buy like 20 or 30 copies of Takedown, and I ship it to all these high schools across Florida and FSU, which I thought was cool. And so they did it, and they were planning on putting me in the Florida Teens Read, which is this competition where they pick 15 books that came out that year, and they ask their students to read 2 or 3, and at the end of the year they all vote on their favorite book, and then they add the slip, and then they count up all the slips from all the schools in Florida, and then they pick the number one book that these teens wanted. And so I am like ecstatic. I don't know what the heck's going on, or this random indie book that I put on Kindle. It was print on demand. So I send it, and I ask them, like, why me? Like, how did it get to this point where you guys thought, like, how'd you even find me? I'm just a random book on Amazon. And the lady writes, she's like, well, here's the person that suggested it. And the lady just said, like, I found your book and I loved it. And she's like, I give it to my students when I don't know what the student might like to read. She's like, my girls love it, my sports guys love it, my mystery reader kids, they love it. She goes, when a kid, I'm repeating myself, but when a kid doesn't know, if she doesn't know what a kid would like, what he's into, she's like, I give him this book. She's like, they come back asking for if there's more stuff by you. They come back asking if there's any other books like this one, and to this day, I think that's the best compliment, like the highest moment in as an author, as writing these books, like that, just that lady saying that and telling me like how she just, this book has become clutch to her as a teacher in her classroom, and how these kids just, it just works. She gives it to them and they love it, and it takes me back to like when I was trying to like figure out what was so good about Twilight, to that all of a sudden I'm like, I felt like I tapped into that, but still it was like it never really sold. No one ever really knew about it beyond a certain extent, compared to Dead by Dawn, or compared to Hurricane Dan. It still never sold, but it was my biggest compliment, and I got to send them to all these Florida school libraries. And if you go to a Florida school or FSU, check your library for Takedown by Brett Wellman and let me know if it's still in there, as I'm curious to know if they even like put the book in there or what. So anyway, the day of the Florida Teens Read Committee's books thing comes out, and they're going to announce the 15 books for 2015. And I'm sitting there, I wake up early. They're like at 7 o'clock in the morning, we're releasing it. And I wake up and I sit there at the computer and I wait and I refresh the page and refresh the page, refresh the page. And all these books start coming out and they're like, romance books. And I was like, it could be a romance. And they go through and it's not in there, and they go like sports books. And they go through and then they're like, the last, and we're down to 5 books left. And it's like 4 books, 3 books, 2 books. And by then I just had this sinking feeling that like it's not going to be in here. And it was like 1 book and then none. And that was it. And the Florida Teens Read announcement lineup was out, and Takedown wasn't in it. And there was this school in Florida that was reading it, and they were kind of messaging, we're reading the book, on Twitter. And I was kind of keeping track of them, and they went dark. Like they stopped mentioning it. And so it just wasn't in it for the year. So I was kind of crushed. I was like, oh, like, how did I not make the cut? Like, what happened? And which that might have been my closest moment to like what I would consider success. And I don't, to this day, and I was afraid to ask. I didn't want to be rude. I just kind of let it be. I was like, that's a bummer. Something happened and they pulled it so it wasn't in. And I was afraid to be like, what happened? I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to like pressure them or anything. I should have, at this point, I'm older now. I should have been like, hey, just curious, so I know for the future, what happened. Was it something I did? Was it a mistake? So that in the future I don't repeat this mistake. What's going on? But I never asked that. I just kind of like ate it and went on with my life. And so then I was just bummed. And it was around that time, or maybe shortly before, I really started getting into ASMR. And I really wanted to get into YouTube, and I really liked ASMR. And I started floating the idea of starting an ASMR channel. And eventually, I was in a 3-year relationship that we broke up. And all of a sudden I found myself with all this time. All of a sudden I went from, obligations as a boyfriend and with her all the time and doing her stuff, probably to an unhealthy amount looking back. Like, it was one of those, like, they're half kind of relationships. I didn't do much on my side. And now that I'm older, I should have pushed for that more. But it wasn't bad. But the consequences on the other foot was I didn't really have much structure in my life. Like, I was home to work and eat, and then the rest I was with her. And so when we broke up, all of a sudden I just got dumped into this life of free time, basically. Just this huge chunk. And like, what do you do with yourself? So I started playing Halo I started an ASMR channel, and I started playing Halo like all day when I wasn't working. I would play Halo Reach, and funny thing about that is when you get in the loading screens, when you're like team matchups, if you played that so much at that time, and it was kind of becoming an older game, you would begin to recognize screen names that weren't your friends, just people you keep matching with over and over. And so we'd get in these games and be like, "Oh, hey Billy, how's it going today?" We'd be like, "Oh, good. Like, how are the games going?" And we'd be like talking to each other in the loading screens, and we weren't even friends, or like didn't even share, you know, a friend request on Xbox. It was just a random matching. Anyway, so then I did that for like 60 days until I got sick of it and I started working out 2 hours a day. So I randomly like threw out Halo, threw in working out, and was working out like 2 hours a day. And that's when you get like, I made that Joker video on this channel that was like my first, to me, viral hit. And the Joker, Jared Leto Joker with his shirt off, because I was like so excited that I was just working out so much, and I felt like great about it, you know, and I wasn't afraid to just be like cover myself in white makeup like the Jared Leto thing. And so that was a huge jump for my channel. Anyways, so takedown fails, and that's kind of like the the whole reason I was stating Whispersoft here is my other excuse was I had all these novels and I needed just this push, because ASMR is kind of looked at as this weird thing, and the further back you go to the birth of ASMR, it's looked at like that more, because now it's getting a little more regular. But you go back to the beginning, it was like, what is this weird thing, you know? And there was that stigma, and I was like, man, do I want to dive into this and be looked at as a weirdo or something? And so I had this free time, and I had all these novels, and I was like, you know what? What if I start this ASMR channel, and as an excuse, a reason to do it, one more reason to push into ASMR, I advertise my novels. Like, I have these novels. I don't have anything on YouTube. So I'll use ASMR, and then I can put my novels on my channel and let people know, and it'll work as advertising, and it can grow the people buying my novels, and that's a good excuse for me to be the final step in starting an ASMR channel, which then just, this has turned into its own beast, and I don't even hardly say anything about my novels on here. I try to a little bit here and there, but I really don't much. So then Takedown's out, and by this time I wanted to write a vampire. I kind of want to do, I read Salem's Lot, and I liked Salem's Lot, but I thought it was too small, because what that book's about is vampires come in and they slowly take over this whole town, and by the end of the book they wipe out the whole town. But it starts off like odd and weird things are going on, and it's kind of the concept of the zombie novel, where it's just a slow build up, and eventually, like, all of a sudden you realize, oh, vampires are taking over, and they just grow and grow and grow. And I just had this idea of like, what if instead of one town, these vampires just decide like, human technology has gone too far, we make our stand now while we can still win. And so the vampires kind of rise up, and they take over basically the United States. And like, you can hear about Europe and the rest of the world, but it's kind of like in the background, like, you know, they mention like, oh yeah, Hong Kong has fell yesterday or whatever. But so it just shows like, oh, odd things are happening. And again, it starts off with, this is normal life, and it's just, I went with that slow build up of like, something's odd, to the point where it's like, don't go out at night, the military's out at night, we go out in the morning, and all there are is like military helmets and empty tanks and no military guys out there and just like guns on the ground. And you're like, what happened to all these military guys? And that kind of stuff, as it slowly devolves into like just complete takeover of the United States. And yeah, so I write this thing, and I went with a bigger novel, so this is like one of my longest ones, and I think it did okay. I thought it was a cool enough story. It's a lot of people, they read it. It's one of their favorites of mine, of like editors that I go to all the time. And I wrote that, but then I built my house and I took time off and I didn't write for a long time. And I started concentrating fully on Whispersoft, and I really doubled down on Whispersoft, and Whispersoft became its own beast. And it was just so exciting that Whispersoft became my whole, all that work I was putting into novels, I started putting into Whispersoft because it was way more successful. And so I was like enjoying it, but I always wanted to write again. So I decided I was looking for another novel. And I always had this idea that I wanted to do like a M. Night Shyamalan, like a book, like with a twist ending. And I wanted the twist ending to be that it's just, this book sets place in like this world that's like ours. Maybe it's like the 1920s, 1940s, but it's like ours, but it's like there's little differences and you're trying to figure it out and you're like, something's off. And then at the end, it's like, boom, flood, disasters, Noah's Ark. This is like biblical pre-flood society that you've been in the whole time, but it's written as though it were kind of a modern day, and you have this image of that world as though it were like, not today, but like the 1920s. And then all of a sudden there's this bait and switch, like, nope, it's not the world you think it is, it's pre-flood Noah's Ark. And so I just had this idea that I wanted to write that for some reason. And then the other one is I watched X-Men Origins Wolverine, and in the intro, Wolverine, it shows him fighting in all of the American wars. Like, I think he fights in the Revolution, and then the Civil War, and then in World War I or II, and then Vietnam, and they do this as the credits play. And someone once said, what a waste of just the intro credits were way cooler than the whole movie. Could you imagine this movie about that? And instead it's just opening credits, and I was like, yeah, I want that. So I combined this pre-flood Noah's thing with this Wolverine fighting in every war, and I just made this guy who can't die, who basically starts off pre-flood Noah, wakes up in the muck, in the mud, to realize the only other survivors are these religious fanatic Amish people, and that the world starts over from them, and he basically lives through all human history from that point. And then he gets to the American wars and, fights in the wars and all this other stuff working to modern day. And I kind of treated it like Forrest Gump. And I even read Forrest Gump in preparation, because I was like, what kind of a novel could do this? And I was like, well, Forrest Gump goes through this large chunk of time, this guy's whole life. And I was like, okay, I'll treat it like that. Like, he's just a modern day guy, like, telling his life story. And it was kind of a structureless story. And I have sent it to a bunch of editors, and I think I've edited it 3 times just because it's such a weird story. It's so structureless, and it's just floats from place to place, and it has overlapping themes. It has an overlapping storyline that the whole thing closes. It's just in the middle, it gets a little lost. So I've been hammering that out, and while it was at editors, I realized that The Great Gatsby was becoming public domain, and I was like, well, what if I rewrote The Great Gatsby as a modern day feature-length, full-length novel about YouTube. And, Gatsby is a big famous YouTuber and all that drama, and just retell the Great Gatsby, but from a modern day, 100 years later, our modern day technology, the same old story replaying out, but in our world today. And so I did that, and I read that. There's a playlist on my channel. I read the whole novel after I published it. It didn't really sell much. Nowadays, Kindle it's not what it was when I first started, especially when Hurricane Dan came out. When I publish something, it definitely doesn't have the reach that it used to. And so that one just came out, and it was kind of what I don't tell you guys. Whatever I tell you guys is about all the attention it gets. So I read that one. It was cool. It was a fun experience. But then I got back onto I'm calling it the Forever Man now. Working on the Forever Man, editing it, sending it to agents, sending it to editors. And now more than any other book, I've actually paid for more editing than I ever have. And this book has gone to 2 professional editors. And it's coming along. I still have the edit of the last, all the requests, but I've been working on it so much that I've just it's been sitting there, and I've just been working on Whispersoft, and I have basically one more edit to do, but there's a lot of suggestions, and I think it will make it complete and full and really tie everything together and be ready. But it's going to be, still a handful of work left. Even though I wrote it so long ago and edited it so many times, these latest edits are going to be, these final stitches are going to be a job of themselves. And so I've just kind of been avoiding it. I actually got them in June, and I've maybe spent a half hour working on them since June. And so I'm just kind of sitting on that. And I have ideas for another story, so I need to get that one done and just, put it out. That's where I am now with Noah's Ark Shinamalon / Wolverine Origins Fighting Every Single War novel, and / Forrest Gump style. That's where I am. And this channel has come along and done more than my novels ever could, but I wouldn't be here without those novels driving me as the excuse to start this channel. And that is pretty cool. And I suppose if you want to check them out, I'll put a link to just the Amazon page with them all, and you can see the covers over the years, all the covers I've done. And I was thinking maybe I could put the edit I have, the current rough edit of the Forever Man, maybe on Wattpad. Maybe you guys, if you wanted, could tell me what you think and be like, well, I didn't like this chapter, I didn't like this, or I like this, this is awesome, it's the best book ever. I don't know. That's just an idea. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I don't know myself. But you're all painted. Now go to sleep.